So this month we've done things a little bit differently for the bike test. We've given ourselves a bit of an end of season treat. Got two of the latest top of the range Enduro 29ers. We've taken them to an amazing event, the Enduro 2 in Davos, Switzerland, and we've put them head to head to see which is the best 29er Enduro bike. So what are the two bikes that we took out there?
So this bike is the Scott Ransom 900 tuned, and the other bike's the new Yeti SB150. Both bikes, obviously, they got 29-inch wheels. They're both orange, and that seems to be the color for 2019. They're both running Fox suspension. The Scott's got 170mm fork, so does the Yeti. But the Scott's got more travel on the rear. It's got like 170mm versus the Yeti's got 150.
Yep.
So they're super evenly matched in terms of geometry. I think when I measured this bike's stocks, when it had the normal tires, the 2.6 tires on, I think both bikes had 64.3 degree head angles, like identical. Now what you'll notice with this bike is that it doesn't have the stock tires.
Yeah. So for the people watching who don't know, why do we change the tires in the bike test?
Oh, because it makes our life way more easier.
We're all about making life easier. It also makes it a lot more fairer test.
It gets a pain in the ass, but basically, tires make such a big difference to one, the performance of the bike, and two, the weight, which we'll get to in a minute. So really what we don't want to be doing is like, it helps us compare like with like. We're going to Davos, we're going racing. Both bikes came with pretty thin wall casing tires. And as we both saw at the race, there's people putting plugs in, there's people fixing punctures the whole time. I didn't want to be doing that. So we've got a DH casing tire on the front and we've got a double down casing tire on the rear.
And they do that to keep the weight down in the showroom, don't they?
Exactly. And in fact, this bike is super light in the showroom. I think it came in at like 28.6 pounds in around that mark. And then actually it was quite a bit lighter it was 2 pounds lighter than Yeti. And then once we put the same tires on both bikes, the weights converge. Right. They're almost identical. Yeah, I think it came down to 200 grams, the weight difference. So not quite as light as it seems, and definitely a better option having the thicker casing tires on. But
because it was ridiculously rocky out there, wasn't it?
Super rocky and super fast.
Yeah.
Also, it was blind.
Yeah.
So you're coming into no idea what's coming up. You're coming in too hot. You're coming in heavy. You're too fatigued.
Lines.
Yeah, totally. Well, you're not taking any lines half the time. So that was a big difference, and it really transformed this bike because at the launch and in your first ride, you commented on the BB being a bit tall.
Yeah.
And I think that might be due to two things. One, obviously, when we changed the tires, it dropped the BB height by 5 mil.
Yeah.
And which is not, it's substantial, but not massive, considering that maybe the 2.6 rear tire would have had a little bit more actual sag in the tire just because of the volume. But I've got a feeling that maybe at the launch you were riding it a little bit firm.
Yeah.
So the ride height was a little bit high, because when we rode it in Switzerland, neither of us thought, hey, the BB is too high on this bike.
Yeah.
Not once.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember you commenting on one of the longer kind of gradual climbs about actually flipping it into traction mode.
Did actually. I managed to find the button. Managed to turn it on.
You're one step ahead of me there, because I couldn't find it. Yeah.
I couldn't turn it off. I had to just hit every button. I managed to turn it off eventually. But it was useful.
Yeah, just to actually, and the other reason why it's useful on this bike is that it doesn't actually pedal that well.
Yeah.
It's soft. The bike's really supple at the start of the stroke. There's not a lot of dampen, there's not a lot of support. So it gives it that amazing pitter-patter feeling. Like, I mean, it was great on high-speed square edge hits, rocks, it just soaked it all up. But the flip side is, when you go to get on the gas and pedal, it's a little bit wallowy. Yeah. So actually being able to firm it up is a good thing. I mean, you mentioned it before when you tested the Genius, that you didn't think Scott needed the twin lock, because the twin lock impacts both the fork and the shock. And I'm in complete agreement with that. Like, and especially on this bike being longer travel, I think it's a benefit. If you're going to have your suspension that open and free on the rear, it's a benefit to have it on the rear. But I saw no use for it on the fork whatsoever.
Because the bike didn't have a good balance front to rear with the suspension, did it?
It didn't, not at all. I mean, it was really interesting. The rear end's supple and rampy, and the fork was kind of like harsh and then linear. So you really had which was really good on the steep terrain because it kept the fork up and it meant the rear suspension was working really well. But when you got into like corners and flatter turns and stuff, the front end would sit high and the rear would squat, and like it would change the balance of the bike. And like I said in the review, You can ride this bike really freaking hard. It definitely wasn't a slower bike, but I just think that balance could catch you out every now and then. And when you're racing, you just want a bike that's really neutral. So I think if they ditched the twin lock and maybe just had like a more simple remote for the rear, had a fork, it would also give them more fork choices probably, because they're not trying to link it to the fork, and even the tune of the damping inside the fork wouldn't have to be towards the firmer end of the spectrum to get the lockout to function well. You could definitely get like better sensitivity in the front. Because I mean, you saw like bottom of some runs, we were both like, whoa, that's good. I mean, they were long runs, but took a beating on it.
Yeah, they were super rough. And if it wasn't enough to have the twin lock, they've actually got this ramp adjust mode, which is new for 2019 as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
We didn't touch that, did we?
Well, we left it. Well, the thing is, neither of us managed to get full travel on this bike, because full travel on that shock pretty much means blowing the O-ring off the shock body. And like we weren't close. We were probably within like 8-9 millimeters of it. And that was with it set up quite soft. So to have a ramp mode, I just don't think it's necessary, like with that current shock setup. That said, there are volume spacers inside that shock. One of the options would be to take maybe the main volume spacer out of the air can, give it a more linear feel, less progressive. And then if you do go somewhere to a bike park, or you're going jumping or sending it off drops, you can hit the ramp mode. But I think the way they sell it, it's an unnecessary feature.
Yeah, so doing that would give you a good contrast, a bigger contrast, wouldn't it, in terms of modes.
But yeah, I mean, some other things, alloy wheels. Yeti's got alloy wheels too, which is great. I mean, we saw a carbon wheel in 7 pieces?
Yeah, we saw one in 7 pieces. I saw at least 2 more that had cracked. And that was just the people immediately around us. So we did ding this one pretty hard.
In fact,
which is why it's soft.
This tire's soft because it's been sat around here for a week and a half now, and it's let the air out. But
we dinged it, air stayed in it, took it to the bike shop straightened it out, resealed tubeless, and we just carried on the whole race with it tubeless. It didn't lose any air. Amazing.
Absolutely fine. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, like we were at Enduro 2, we're not like at the competitive end. But like if you're racing EWSs, like you can't, like if you have to change a wheel, that's a time penalty. You may as well forget it. And I mean, that's why a lot of pros ride alloy wheels. So it's really good to see brands spec'ing alloy wheels on the bikes. And like the other thing we need to point out is like this bike's $7,000, the Yeti's 7,200. If you put carbon wheels on these bikes, that means they're $8,000 bikes. I mean, it's just getting ridiculous, I think, in terms of price. I mean, like talking to carbon, it has got like a funky little piece of carbon here at the front where the one-piece bar and stem. And I was pretty nervous about that because I'm particular about my cockpit setup. And it didn't bother me once, really.
It looks weird and it feels.
It feels totally normal. It looks totally weird. And obviously we put the Ergon grips on to make it the same as the Yeti again, so that the tires, the pedals, and the grips were the same. So we were swapping bikes every run. So you just want to jump on every stage, and you just want to jump on and have your contact points all the same. So you've got a little bit of leeway to adjust the sweep, but I'd say the biggest thing with that bar stem combo is, one, it's expensive, and we were running the stem at full height. And if you were taller or were riding really steep trails and wanted to go higher, you really can't. So you'd have to buy a new bar and stem, whereas with a normal 2-piece setup, you could either buy a higher rise stem or a higher rise bar, and you can change the sweep. And so it wasn't. I thought it feels perfectly normal, and if it fits, no problem. But it's kind of like, seems like a waste if it doesn't work for you.
And the sizing on this bike, it was like when we were swapping between stages. It's quite noticeable. It feels shorter, doesn't it, than the Yeti? It's not a small bike, but it does feel compact when you jump between the two.
Definitely, it's not short at all, and it's actually, I think there's maybe only 15 mil difference in the reach, maybe even less than that. There's not a huge difference. It's not a full size jump between the two bikes. I think maybe the way the suspension works and it sits into its travel more might affect the reach and make the bike bring the bars a little bit closer to you, make it feel smaller. It felt a bit more agile because obviously like the progression makes it really springy on the back at least. But yeah, I think at least for the first 2 days, every time we swapped, you get on the Scott and you go, oh my God, it feels tiny. But then there were tracks that were tight and twisty and more like kind of like less high speed, straight out, flat out stuff. And were actually the size and felt that you could actually pull the bike around a lot more. So I wouldn't say it's small by any means. And even, I say with Yeti sizing, at like our height, like 5'10", 5'11", you could ride a medium or a large because you're looking at a 460 or a 480 reach.
Yeah. I think on this, another thing is I'd like them to fit shorter cranks. Just to give a bit of ground clearance. The brakes were good, like even with a smaller rotor on the back.
Yeah, I mean the rotor's smoked, but like the brakes were the code brakes were consistent the whole time. Yeah. Shifting was really good on it. Like it's a quiet bike. It's got a chain guide on it, which I like because the Yeti doesn't have one, and I mean the chain didn't come off the Yeti. But when you're racing and you paid all that money to go to an event, the last thing you want is like lose time because you're putting the chain back on. I think the build's good. I'd say there's this little bit here where the seat stay assembly meet the rocker.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool the way it's been designed to kind of flow into the rocker link. But you can actually see on this bike here, there's a little chip, and stones and stuff can get caught in there as the link extends again. I don't think it's a reliability issue. It's just aesthetic, really. It's like your bike gets chipped up and you've got a 7-gram bike and it's got stone chips on it. So
the Genius 900 tuned, I mean, it was performed brilliantly. Just the balance, really, wasn't it? So
I think if they were to put a single lock just on the shock, and then either put the Grip 2 fork rather than the Fit 4, because I think that with the Fit 4 fork, it just doesn't have that same sensitivity with the new negative, or with the new top out bumper, and the negative spring's not as big as the Grip 2. They could definitely bump the bike up a rating quite easily.
Yeah, and what did it get in the end?
It got an 8.
Yep.
Yeah. So like it's a solid bike.
Test,
It just kind of needs to get that suspension balance back and maybe get rid of the twin lock. I think so.
So that's the Scott Ransom 900 tuned. So we're going to swap bikes just like we did in the race at Enduro 2. And the reason why it made such a perfect event to test these two bikes is that it's an Enduro stage race that you do in pairs, in teams of 2. So we teamed up, Team MBR. We basically, your times are taken from the time the first person crosses the line and then the second person crosses the finish line. So it's a combined time that adds up to your overall. And so you basically ride it like you would as mates out in the Alps and just kind of like training each other down, towing each other when there's like some hideous climbs. But mostly there was just amazing descents. The
trails were unreal.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
I've ridden in the Alps quite a lot, and sometimes you got to go there and you think, oh yeah, it's kind of a footpath, it's kind of weird, it goes along, it traverses, it comes back, it's picky, it's kind of cool because you're in this amazing scenery, and you're kind of like, trails are okay. Sometimes I think the trails are better at home. Trails were amazing.
Yeah.
Just like
these were hiking trails with flow
that had been adopted by a crew of people that had gone in and like made them work for bikes. Yeah. And they're some of the best trails I've ridden anywhere.
I think the best event I've ever ridden, for sure, in 30 years of events, or something ridiculous. Yeah. And probably 3 of the best days riding I've done in a long time.
Blind trails, didn't know where we were going, and different bike every trail. just to
mix it up.
Just to spice it up.
And some of the stages were, 12 minutes was the longest stage.
Yeah.
A lot of them were like 6 minutes, 3 minutes. I mean, there was 16 stages, I think, over 3 days.
And then we did an extra day of ride into
12,000 meters of descending. Yeah. Probably only about 100 meters of climbing in the whole thing.
There wasn't a lot of climbing. The little climbs that were there, I remember them, but it wasn't much.
And brilliant uplift system throughout the whole event. 400 riders. I mean, you've got to do it. Like, if you want to do a really good event in the Alps, sign up for it next year. We'll be signing up again.
We'll be there.
We'll be there. Just need to get 2 more bikes.
So let's swap out the bikes and get the Yeti in.
So now the Yeti SB150. I mean, this is a bike that's been breaking hearts across the internet.
It's not breaking my heart. I'm in love, man. She's mine. I've been breaking other people's hearts.
It's been walking away within EWS races as well, hasn't it? I mean,
totally.
Is that just a coincidence that Richie Rude suddenly
I doubt it. I mean, obviously, like I'd be excited if I was Richie Rude riding this bike. I'm excited riding it too. So
it was one of those bikes where everyone pretty much in the office who got on it was just blown away by how good it was.
Totally. I mean, and like my concern with this bike always was it feels amazing in the UK, but what's it going to feel like in the Alps? So that's one of the reasons why, like going to Enduro 2, taking this bike and the Scott together, actually riding on world-class trails that are of like an EWS standard and stuff, and seeing how it handles it. And it didn't really go to plan straight away. So we got there. Obviously, like the geometry in this bike's amazing, the sizing's amazing, the position you're on the bike is just, it just felt more commanding than the Scott, but the rear suspension didn't feel anything like as good.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the suspension felt more balanced, but the rear end felt harsh.
It just seemed to hang up a little bit.
And the bike felt a bit dead. It wasn't easy to pick up. And
No.
I actually thought when we got to the Swiss Alps and stuff and the speeds picked up, that the bike would actually get more dynamic, and it seemed to get less. And then we remembered, well, actually this bike's been in a lot of demand. Not just everyone in the office wanting to ride it, but it went back to a Yeti Tribe event. And I think maybe some of the damping settings got changed. I know the pressure definitely got changed in the shock. So then we started playing with the high-speed compression, low-speed compression, backing it off to try and allow the bike to basically just go through those square edge hits on the roots and the rocks and stuff, because it felt really good on the more sort of naturally falling away trails where you're going down into holes and catching in a corner. But when you went on just like the chatter, it definitely felt harsher than the Scott. And that made a big difference. Like that
it transformed it. Yeah.
That Fox shock's got four-way adjustable damping, so you kind of need to know what you're doing. And what was really interesting too is when we backed off the high-speed compression, all of a sudden the rebound felt faster, because basically there's more energy going into the spring's recoiling a little bit faster because the compression damper is not absorbing that energy. So all of a sudden, oh yeah, here we are again. The bike feels dynamic, and like it took us like a day and a half really to work that out really, because we're too busy trying to get to terms with the racing and stuff. And you're gonna have to invest a little bit of time on this bike to get it set up, but I think the rewards are worth it.
Once we made those changes, I mean, it was just so good to ride, wasn't it? I mean, you just tucked in behind those bars and you could just kind of let it go over all of that chat, hideous rocky terrain.
Yeah, totally.
And yet it also felt really rewarding in the more flowy sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it's one of the things with Yetis in the past has always been like their geometry looked a little bit dated, a little bit short, a little bit high and stuff. And this bike's kind of long, it's low, it's slack, and you get on it and you just feel like you're in the perfect riding position on it. It's got amazingly good standover too. So that's the other thing, is that although this is a large, shorter riders that wanted a longer bike could easily get on this, because like it's really compact. And by putting that kink in the bottom of the down tube, that's created enough space to get a water bottle in there. And like, I mean, I know even I watched the video of Richie Rude, and like that's one of the things he's super pumped about, is that you can get a water bottle in your frame. It's true. It's great when you're out riding. You don't have to have a pack. And the other thing in this bike that's worth mentioning, it's got a steep seat angle. It's not as steep as they quote, because they quote the effective seat angle, but the actual seat angle is still pretty steep on it.
It's better than the Scott.
It's way better than the Scott. Puts you in a way better position for climbing, and it climbs better than the Scott. It's more stable. It sits there. It's steady. You don't need to use the climb switch on the shock. In fact, you don't need to think about it at all. You just basically, all you think about is hurting and getting up the climb as quickly as possible. So there's no trade-off really for having the 150 mil travel in the rear and the 170 mil fork. I mean,
we were actually getting quite similar rear travels out of both.
Yeah,
bikes,
we were,
we?
because of the ramp up on the Scott. I don't think you get the full measure of travel, at least with the stock setup. So it didn't feel like you got off one and on. What you really felt when you swapped the bikes was the size and the position. You didn't feel, oh, this bike's got 20 mil less travel, because I don't think
it wasn't undergunned, was it?
I don't think it has 20 mil less travel, like in reality. I'd say there were a few times where I'd say it felt big, like on those tighter trails where you're turning, you're pulling the bike around more, where the Scott felt really good. I think the Yeti didn't feel like a handful, but you just felt like you had to be a little bit more forceful.
Yeah, put a bit more muscle in
to pull it around. But then I think that's where it plays to the 29er strengths. Like you said, chundering down stuff, high speed, thudding through compressions and stuff, the bike just feels like unstoppable. So yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. I think there's a few improvements they could make on it. Like we said on the original video I did. Again, it comes with standard case and tires. Enduro race bike. Needs to have a double down on the rear minimum, maybe ideally DH case and tires. And it comes with a 30 tooth chainring, which is great if you're spending a load of time like grinding up massive climbs. But obviously we were using the Swiss lift system, so the chairlift system. So we weren't actually doing a lot of climbing. And if I was going to be riding in that environment, I'd have a bigger chainring on the bike just to kill off some of the anti-squat and to kill off some of the pedal kickback that comes with it. Because I think that's what kind of causes that slight hookup when you're on repeated square edge hits, is that you're kind of fighting the chain tension. And just by putting a bigger chainring on it and bringing it closer to the pivot, you'd reduce that quite a lot. Yeah, totally. Other aspects of the spec, XT brakes were really good. We had 180mm rotors front and rear on this bike.
Didn't want for bigger rotors.
Didn't need any more power in there. And I would also say like the alloy wheels on this have been, like the DT Swiss wheels have been amazing, because we were a little bit ambitious initially with the tire pressures. I think I had like 21 in the front and like 23 in the rear. And we dinged the rim. We could hear them dinging. But the rim's perfectly round. There's no major dents in it. And I think I only ended up going up to maybe 22 and 24. Yeah. And apart from that one dented rim on the Scott, we didn't have a puncture, no flats. So like, you know, and also that makes a really big difference to the amount of grip you have, how much comfort you get. So I think that's something I'd like to see them implement as standard. But then if you're riding this bike in the UK,
you don't need to.
You probably don't need double down casing, or you definitely don't need a DH case and front tire on there. Save some weight, it'll roll more efficiently. So yeah, I wouldn't stress about that. I mean, one of the things we both heard commented on this bike is that it's flexy. I mean, you spent as much time on this bike as I did. Did you think it was flexy?
Not at all. And you know, you look at Richie Rude again. We'll mention him again. You know, he's a quarterback basically. He's
totally solid dude. I think he's 90 kilos plus. He's a big guy.
He is going to pick up on stuff like that. He's not going to want a bike that's flexy. He's going to put a load more power in than we're going to do.
So. He'd probably actually put in both of our power combined.
Quite probably. So. For me, it wasn't an issue. I mean, I think if you start manipulating the back end, it might look like it's flexy, but you don't notice that when you're riding at all. So.
It never crossed my mind until someone said, "Hey, I've heard that bike's flexy," and I was like, "Well, who'd you hear that from?" Because I just didn't get that sensation from it at all. If someone had said to me, "Oh, it feels a little bit harsh on some square edge stuff," I'd go, "Yeah, I know what you're talking about," but flexy, no, it's definitely not flexy. And like, I think what I really liked about it too was the progression on the suspension. I thought was really good front and rear. And they put this little, so basically the shock used to be driven off the swing arm, and now it's driven off that little kind of scissor extender link, and that's allowed them to put more progression into the entire suspension system. And it just feels really good. You get all the travel, but it never feels wallowy. It never feels like you're kind of like it's a soft, mushy bike. But yet you're getting it all. It's like,
they've done a really good job with balancing the pedaling versus the suspension performance, haven't they?
I mean, we debated because of those small things like the thin wall tire case and the 30-tooth chaining. Maybe we want a 32. We kind of debated like, should this bike be a 10? Because maybe when you're spending 7,200 pounds on a mountain bike, it should be perfect to get a 10 rating. And then we were like, well, actually, if you're riding in the UK, those things aren't critical. And I don't remember a single bike that's been through the office this year has created so much excitement. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've had as much fun riding. It's fantastic. It's a great bike.
I mean, this is lottery win money, but it is a proper dream bike, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And it really lives up to the billing.
And I mean, it looks stunning. Yeah. I mean, like we had both bikes together at an event with 400 people. Which bike got all the attention?
Oh yeah, that's the Yeti for sure. Yeah. So there you have it, the winner of our 29er Enduro head-to-head test, the Yeti SB150.